Hello, thank you for joining us here at AITP North Central Florida. I'm Cherokee Booth. I am on the board of directors, and it is my pleasure tonight to introduce Mr. Don Pezet for our presenting role. Unfortunately, our original speaker, Joe Peacock, wasn't able to make it this evening. So thank you so much, Don, for being with us tonight and taking up this role. Don is also our current North Central Florida president, so we appreciate that and really look forward to what you have to talk about today.
Excellent. Thank you, Cherokee, for the great intro. And, my apologies to everybody. I know that Joe was going to come in and speak about ITIL version 4, which is a big hot topic right now. A lot of people are very interested in it. I wanted that talk to happen as well, but she fell ill, unfortunately. So we will get her back to give that presentation one day. Unfortunately, I don't have an ITIL background, so I can't talk about it. So we are going to talk about something that I do know about, which are web application firewalls. And we talked about this. If you've been following our chapter, or if you've been a member, you know that I gave a talk last year on a denial of service attack that my company's website experienced and some of the steps we went through to basically stop it. And I mentioned in there how important it was to have a web application firewall, because that's what you can use to stop a number of these attacks. Even if the web application firewall or a WAF, if the WAF is configured wrong, at least if it's there, you can get in there and use it to stop an attack. If it's not there, things are really challenging. It's really difficult to recover from these things, and you will have downtime. So one of the questions I got after that talk was, how do you set up a WAF? What does that look like? So that's what this is, kind of a sequel to the last presentation. I'm going to take a website and show you what it takes to get it stuck behind a web application firewall. You'll see it's actually pretty easy. And once it's there, you've now got a new first line of defense for when your network or your servers become under attack. And just to kind of get it out here in the beginning, I'm going to say WAF and web application firewall throughout this whole presentation, but it's not just web servers. WAFs can actually be really effective for a number of different technologies, and there's a ton of different vendors that operate in this space. I'm going to use an example of one here in the presentation, but in real life land, there's people like Cloudflare and Encapsula, there's Security, there's just a ton. And there's even open source solutions out there where you don't have to spend a dime. You can set up your own installation and get it up and going. So keep that in mind. There's not just one solution for a lot of this stuff. All right, so let's start with how a WAF works. All right, so I've got a little diagram here. And what this shows is kind of what a normal application deployment looks like on the internet, at least. That you have your clients that are out there. These are customers, people you don't know. They could be in any country. They could be using any operating system. You don't know. And you have something like a web server that's plugged in and connected to the internet, and you want people to access it. Now, if you just expose a server to the internet, you just plug that cable in and let it go, what you'll find is that you're constantly getting scanned by attackers, and automated attacks will take place, that systems directly connected to the internet are under attack the moment they plug in. It's just, that's the nature of the internet these days. So most operating systems have a firewall built into them. And I'm not just talking about server operating systems, even desktops, Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, they've got firewalls built into them now to try and protect them. And those firewalls are good, but they only go so far. So for example, if I have a web server and it's connected to the internet, I don't know who's going to reach out to my server. So even if I have a firewall in front of it, I still have to have a rule on that firewall that says, I want to allow HTTP traffic, right? The regular World Wide Web or www traffic, which is on TCP port 80, and secure traffic, HTTPS, on TCP port 443. I have to open those two and allow anyone in the world to access my server on those two ports. If I don't do that, they can't get the web page, right? The whole point of a web server is to serve up a web page. And if we're making it public, we have to allow everybody to get to it. So if an attacker is going to attack your server and they do it on port 80 or they do it on port 443, what's your firewall going to do? The answer? It's going to say, hey, this is allowed, and allow it to pass right through. So a regular firewall, maybe the software one in your operating system, or maybe an actual hardware. Maybe you have a Cisco ASA, a Juniper SSG, something like that. If you've opened those ports, it's going to allow traffic on those ports. And that's because they're operating really at like layer 3 and layer 4 of the OSI model. So they're just looking at TCP port numbers and that's it. But the trend today is to leverage firewalls that operate at higher layers, that operate at the application layer, that can actually look at the traffic and say, all right, I know this is web traffic, but what's it doing? Is it requesting a web page? Is it trying to post data? Is it trying to access a particular directory? This goes way beyond just what the port number is, actually looking at what the application is asking for and saying, is that okay? Or is this attack type traffic? And it's pretty easy to recognize. As a human, we can look at it and say, WordPress. Let's say this is a WordPress server. Well, every WordPress server has a subdirectory, /wp-admin. And inside of that is, I think it's actually just wp-admin.php, right? That's that admin portal for WordPress. So I know that my IP address should be allowed to get to that page because I'm the administrator. But should everyone in the world be able to get to that page? No. We don't want unknown people trying to log into our admin portal. So a web application firewall can look at that. Now, there's different terms that are out there for this. A lot of people call them ALGs, or application layer gateways. If you have Cisco ASAs, it's referred to as an ALG. If you're dealing with pfSense firewalls or Juniper SSGs, they call them WAFs there. And there's a number of other ones that are out there. But the basic idea is that the WAF is not a replacement for your firewall. It's designed to work in addition to your firewall. That it may sit in between your firewall and the internet, or in between your firewall and your server. Either way, it just needs to be in line between the internet and your web server. And it's going to look not just at what port traffic's following, but what commands are actually being sent inside of the application headers. So really getting an idea of what that traffic is. Right. Now, most of the web application firewalls that are out there are all built on the same technology. I mentioned there were a bunch of different vendors, right? So for example, there's Cloudflare. Cloudflare is a pretty big one. A lot of people are familiar with them because they've been in the news for some controversial stuff they've done. I'm not the biggest fan of Cloudflare, but Cloudflare, I can't even say it. But they are one of the big market leaders in this space. They provide basic web application firewall services. They really focus on stopping distributed denial of service attacks, just volumetric stuff, huge amounts of traffic. But attacks are way more sophisticated today than they used to be. That if an attacker really wants to take down your website, network cards and bandwidth has become a lot less expensive. People have tons of bandwidth. So it's hard to overwhelm somebody's line with excessive bandwidth. And that's what Cloudflare protects you from. So if those types of attacks are really hard to do, the attackers will switch to something easier instead. Maybe they know some kind of exploit or vulnerability in the web application package that you're running. And so they can target an attack to that. And that's very low bandwidth. So it won't set off alarms. They don't see tons of traffic coming from a vendor. They just see a little bit of traffic coming in, but that's very damaging traffic. It might be SQL injection attacks, cross-site scripting, all sorts of web attacks that don't require tons of bandwidth. So providers like these, and I mentioned Securi, Encapsula, my company, we actually use Encapsula for ours. I'm not endorsing one product or another, it just happens to be what we use. But they all basically work the same way. In fact, the diagram I showed you a moment ago, it looked a little bit different, but here's Cloudflare's diagram where you see they've got some clients on the left, they've got their web application firewall, and then they've got a destination server on the other end, right? They're sitting in between your customers and your website. But they all really build off of the same technology. This right here, ModSecurity 3.0. So years ago, this is not a new technology, it's over 10 years ago, an Apache module was written. And Apache is the world's most popular web server. That's what most people run. And ModSecurity, well, mod is short for module. It was an Apache module that you would add on. And what it allowed you to do was to look at the commands that a guest was sending and to look at the URLs that they were requesting and make decisions based off of that. That sounds a lot like a WAF, doesn't it? That's because this is what most of the WAFs are based off of. When you sign up for Cloudflare, Securi, Encapsula, any of those various vendors, what you're really doing is signing up for ModSecurity. Now, ModSecurity is open source and totally free. I'm on the webpage right here, modsecurity.org. You'll see right here, get the code, right? And I can even get the rules, support, there's all this stuff. So why would I pay somebody when I could just go and get this stuff for free? The technology is not that advanced. It's not what you're paying for. What you're paying for are the rules, all right? in order for this to work, ModSecurity has to identify what is bad traffic and what is good traffic. And it has a set of rules that define that. Remember, I mentioned the WordPress admin portal. There's a rule that says this is the admin portal. If there's a known vulnerability, they see how that's exploited, and then they create a rule that says, look for when somebody's trying to exploit this and block it. So those rules are really important. Well, there's a set of community rules. Those are free. You can download them and they're free, but they're not cutting edge. They're not super current. And so what happens is companies like Imperva, they're the ones who own Encapsula, it gets a little confusing, but what they do is they have a team of security researchers that are actively curating their rules so you can block the most current types of attacks that are out there. Cloudflare does the same thing. Cisco, Juniper, they all do the same thing. They have their research labs that are all coming up with the latest and greatest rules. So when you buy those commercial products, what you're really buying is them curating the rule set for you so that when an attack is known, even if you haven't patched your server yet, they'll stop the attack before it gets to your server. That's the nice part. You know, in my little diagram here, when we have a firewall, if an attacker passes through the firewall, or if we didn't have the firewall at all, the attacker at that point is on your web server. And so if you're blocking things on the web server itself, it's kind of too late at that point, right? They've already gotten to the server. But when you have a WAF in place, they're stopping that attack before it makes it all the way to the server. And that helps to ensure that even if the server is not patched, as long as you stop the traffic from getting there, you'll be fine. So it's a great extra layer of defense. But I mentioned in the beginning, what if we've misconfigured this thing? Even if you've misconfigured it, if it's allowing everything through, the moment you see that there's an attack going on, you've got basically like a spigot that you can turn and shut off the traffic. You know, let me just cut that off and then solve your problem, fix it, recover your server, and then open the spigot, let the traffic back through again, right? So having that valve there is really important. If you didn't have something in line, you would have to put something in line. And that means you've got to take your server offline, move it, kind of rearrange things, and that's going to create some downtime. And I'll show you how we can kind of avoid that here in a few moments. All right, so that's really what a lot of this comes down to, is basically just having an inline device that's examining the traffic passing through. Now, some of these are pretty expensive. Some of them are pretty inexpensive. On the expensive side, you have things like Encapsula, which you'd have to get official pricing from them, but I'm pretty sure their base license starts at about $5,000 a year. But I don't know anybody who's really gotten through them for less than like $10,000 a year, and it goes up even higher depending on the amount of bandwidth that you push. So that's a lot of money. If you're a small business or a medium business, that can be a hard kind of bill to swallow there, right? But there are lower cost alternatives. If you run a WordPress site, which over 40% of the internet does, there's a service out there called Security. And I've had the chance to meet and talk with the owners of Security a few times, and I've worked with their company a number of times over the years, and they provide a WAF that is specifically focused on WordPress. That's their focus. And they have an amazing set of rules that are designed for that, and it's all designed to help small companies. So the pricing on it is actually really reasonable. In fact, here, let me pull up their pricing. A lot of the other vendors don't post their pricing, but basically what they have is various security offerings. This isn't just the WAF. Hang on, let me go to just their WAF pricing. Here we go. So if you just want their web application firewall, it's $20 per month for the pro service. That's not so bad, right? So this is where I've made this statement. I know I've told several of you in previous meetings, if you don't already have one, you really should. And at a minimum, something like this, even if you're not running WordPress, you could still put it in between your website and the internet because it would still give you a way to control access. The rules aren't going to be that great, but at least you've got a way to control access and see the traffic that's passing through to your system. So, cost is not really an issue on this. There's low cost options that are out there, or you could roll your own. You could actually bring up a box running ModSecurity. There's plenty of tutorials out there on the internet on how to do it. And so that's kind of a key piece to getting all of this done. Just do it, right? Get one put in. All right, now, if we decide to pull the trigger on doing a web application firewall, what we have to do is we have to change our configuration. And I showed you in my diagram here that extra WAF kind of in between, all right? This diagram is not really accurate, though. I guess it would be accurate if we ran our own WAF hardware, right? So if you had a Juniper SSG with the application layer gateway software on it, and you were setting up that way, or Cisco with Firepower, or whatever device it is, then it would look like this. But for most of us, we're going to leverage a third-party service. And that third-party service, we're basically going to take our web traffic, and instead of sending it to our site, we're going to send the traffic to them first. And they're going to filter the traffic, and then only what passes will then get sent to you. So it actually looks a little more like this, right? And so when somebody comes to your website, that's a good guy, right? The good guy is going to go to the WAF, hit the WAF. It's going to either clear them or block them. And if it clears them, then it's going to get sent along to your web server. All right. So that's really what it looks like. We've got to tell the world when they want to come to our website, don't go straight to our server. Instead, go over to this other provider. And that's really kind of I'm going to call it the hard part of getting a WAF set up. It's not even that big of a deal because it's DNS records that drive all this stuff. So we just change the DNS records. The nice part here is that let's say the client already has our server's IP cached. So it already knows our server's IP and it's going to go directly to it. Well, when I change the DNS record, they can still go directly to the server and access it. And as soon as they refresh their DNS record, then they'll get sent over to the new location, or they'll go over to the firewall like everybody else. So there's really no downtime involved. We just changed the DNS record, right? So let me show you that. I've got a website that is just a silly little website I use on my shows. You ever want to figure out what your public IP is? There's a ton of websites that are out there that do it, and they all have, they're covered with advertisements and stuff like this. So a few years ago, we whipped up this little website. It's showmemy.info. And you go to the website, and it just shows you what your IP is, right? So pretty simple. But it is a dynamic page. It is something that potentially could be attacked. It is actually a web server on the back end, and I'll be the first one to admit it's a web server I don't pay a lot of attention to. I installed it years ago, and I don't know. I have it set for automatic updates, but every 6 months or so, I log into it just to make sure it's okay. So it's a neglected server. Somebody could hack into this thing, and I wouldn't necessarily know it for months, right? But again, I'm not too terribly worried about it. If it was my email server, it'd be a different story, right? I'd care more about that. But I want to protect this page. And right now, if somebody wants to access this page, they're going to do a DNS lookup, and they're going to find the IP address of this actual server. And they're going to go directly to this server and access the page. If they know an attack, they can pull off the attack, and they're going to hit the server and attack it, right? Now, what I want to do is tell people not to go directly to the server, but to go through my WAF. So when you set up a service, like here on Security, I'm going to go over to Security and add a new site. They ask you what the site is, and I'll put in this showmemy.info. And when you specify it, you can do www if you need it, or you can do the naked domain. Just in my case, it would be showmemy.info, but whatever it is, you punch it in. And Security offers other services, like they'll help you stop an attack if it's ongoing, or they'll help clean up your website if it's been infected. I don't need any of that, so I'm just going to punch in that address and hit add site. Now, once I've added it, that's adding it on their hardware, but the world doesn't know about it. The world is still going to actually go directly to my server. And that's what it's telling me right here. The service is not activated. It's saying that the world is going to this IP address. And that IP, that's the IP on the actual server. So right now it's 52.87.109.124. Now, as we set this up, DNS uses a caching system. So when somebody does a lookup, it holds the IP for a little while, and you kind of have to wait for that to time out before everybody moves over to the new one. So whenever I set this up, I use a cool website. This is DNSChecker.org. And I know it's kind of small here on the screen, but DNSChecker.org, it's a free website. You can go to it, and they do something really cool. You can type in a domain name. So like I'll do www.showmemy.info, all right? And you can do a search. And what it does is a DNS lookup of the address you typed in from a number of places around the world. And so here it's doing the lookup from the East Coast, the West Coast of the US, Canada, all over Europe, Africa, Australia, really everywhere. I think the Soviet Union and China, well, no, China's got a check mark. Soviet Union doesn't. The Soviet Union is doing interesting stuff with their DNS topology these days. So not necessarily relevant, but anyhow, so it's doing lookups all over. The reason I bring this up is anytime you change the DNS records on your server, you need to remember that it takes time to propagate around the globe. And whoever your DNS host is, whoever your registrar is, they're going to do the official answer and tell you changes could take up to 48 hours, right? Because that's the maximum time to live. And so they know they're safe if they tell you 48 hours. Well, that's 2 days. Imagine your site's under attack right now, and you need to redirect people and get them going through a firewall to stop this attack. If you make a change and it takes 48 hours to take effect, that's 48 hours of downtime you're going to have, right? So we need changes to take effect quickly. And a lot of times they do. They happen quickly. We just don't know it. So a site like this helps. It's running a check all across the globe. And I can see no matter where I am on the planet, that it's always resolving the same IP address. You know, here it is in China, Japan, Singapore, Pakistan, Switzerland, so on, all the same IP, okay? And I'm bringing that up now because I'm about to make a change. And when I make that change, I want to know that it worked, all right? So back on the security page here, it's telling me that my system's not activated, right? I need to repoint DNS so that the world goes to security instead of going to my server. So it gives me the instructions right here of what to do. I need to change the DNS A record and point it to this new address. Instead of going to my address, it's going to go over to this other one, okay? There are some other options like here. They tell me I can use their DNS servers and they'll set it up for me. Be careful with options like that. Cloudflare actually requires that you use their DNS servers, right? That's not always a good idea. For example, we use AWS for a number of services, and we use Terraform to deploy a lot of records inside of AWS. Well, you can't do that with Cloudflare's DNS servers. So that would actually break some of the systems that we rely on. We have to have our DNS zones, and we need to have them in AWS. So while that is an option and it might work for you, it's not without risk. So always be aware of how you're leveraging your current DNS servers. All right, but I need to change mine, and I need to change it from my IP to security's IP. So I'm just going to copy that IP address right there. So I've got it, okay? Now, I'm doing showmemy.info, right? That main name. If you were doing www.showmemy.info, then you would actually have a C name instead of an A record. And that's because a lot of these providers will also package in CDN or content distribution network systems so that they can have servers all over the globe. And when somebody requests your web page, they'll get a response from a server that's near them, right? If somebody's in Australia and my server is in New York, that's a pretty good distance. They got to jump to get a copy of my web page. But if my WAF vendor has, they call them POPs or points of presence. If they have a point of presence in Australia, they can cache a copy of my web page right there in Australia. And then the Australian visitors will get a copy of the page from a server near them, which is a lot faster. In order to make that work, they have to use C names. And so instead of an A record here, I would see a C name to be able to use for that. All right, but in my case, I just have this IP, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Then I'm going to go over to my DNS provider. In this case, I'm using a service called Hover. You might have your own DNS server, Bind or Microsoft DNS. Maybe use GoDaddy or AWS, Route 53, or whatever DNS server it is you have. And you've got to go in and find that public record. So going in here, let me just pull mine up real quick. Here we go. I can see I've got an A record for showmemy.info and for www, and they're both pointing to that public IP. All right. So I'm going to edit those records. Now, notice the time to live on these. I've shortened my time to lives. I've set them to 5 minutes. The default on Hover is 15 minutes. Depending on your provider, it might be shorter, it might be longer, just depends. Mine are at 5 minutes. So in theory, if I make a change now, it could be up to 5 minutes before somebody else sees it, right? And 5 minutes is not bad. 48 hours, that's bad. That's a long time, right? But if I know my records never really change, I can actually improve performance by having a longer time. Most of us today don't worry about performance on DNS lookups. We just worry about being able to effectively change fast. All right, so I'm going to edit these records, and I'm just going to point them over to that new IP. So I'm going to make that change. All right. Now, here's where that DNSChecker.org comes in. I've changed the record. I've changed that on my DNS servers. It's updated, so out there in the real world, people who've never looked up my server would look it up and immediately get this new address. But if somebody's looked up my server in the past, they may have the old value cached, and they'll still get that. So if I jump back over to DNS Checker, and I come in and I do that search, right? Here it's going to run the search, and I can already see I'm getting 192.124 back. But if you look closely, notice in Holtzville, New York, they got the new IP. But in Canoga Park, California, they got the old IP. And then in, well, that's Holtzville again, Mountain View, that's Google, they got the new one. And so, looking down the list here, I can see where most people have gotten the new one, but actually I guess it's just one that has the old one, and that's it. All right, so only one person, one DNS server still has the old entry. But that means that in theory, I still have some users that are going directly to the server. But within a matter of moments, let me just rerun that. We should hit that 5-minute window. I'm not actually going to wait 5 minutes. Oh, there we go. And now everybody is in conformance, right? Everybody's testing out on that new IP. So now the world is seeing this new entry, okay? And at that point, now they should be passing through the firewall. And actually, Security will check that for me. Let me go over to Security. And back here where it was telling me service not activated, right, and telling me the domain is pointing in the wrong place, I should be able to refresh that. And they're going to do a lookup on their end, and that should pass. There we go. And so now it shows that it passes, and they've actually grabbed a screenshot of what my server looks like, and it's kind of fun. Normally, this would show their, a regular home page, and it would look the same, but my page shows what your IP is. And so in this case, it's actually telling me what IP address Security used to browse and access my server. So we actually get to see a little insight on the network. Also a lesson that it's really easy to leak information about your systems and not know it. So in this case, Security has kind of leaked to me one of their connection nodes, which they publish a lot of this stuff, so I'm not too worried about that. All right, but now it is set up. And so if anybody were to fire up a web browser and point to showmemy.info right now, they would be passing through Security first, getting checked, and then get sent on to the actual website. And that includes me. So if I were to open up another tab here and go to showmemy.info, that passed through Security and then went over to the website. Now, did that load slowly? As a customer, did I have a different experience? Not at all, right? Nothing really changed, right? So your customers won't even notice this happened. But if attackers are coming through, they can really start hammering your site. They can attack it. They can deface it, right? Put all sorts of crazy stuff on there. And now you have a real problem. Or Security can stop it, block that before it even gets to the server. And now you're fine, right? Now let's pretend for a moment that attackers are actually getting through for some reason, right? Well, now that I've got an intermediary, somebody sitting in between my site and the internet, I can leverage the tools that are built right into that software. And so you'll see if I go into the Security tab, there's all sorts of things that I can tweak here. Things like stop uploading PHP or executable content, enable emergency distributed denial of service protection. There's aggressive bot filters that you can turn on that your regular end users won't notice, but will stop attackers dead in their tracks. So we can enable a lot of this. See, right here is the aggressive bot filter I was talking about. All of these are options that most of your regular customers will never even notice, but you can use to trim off that attack traffic. So it's really neat that we've got that. You can even do other things like there's a way to do protected pages in here. I've used this before where you go through and say, look, I'm under attack right now, so I'm going to turn on protected pages where I require everyone to pass a CAPTCHA to get to the site, okay? So if I just put in like / here as a protected page and set that CAPTCHA challenge and protect it, now when somebody goes to browse to my site, they're going to have to pass a CAPTCHA, those little Google tests that pop up. And let's see, I might have already authorized, but let's see if I get popped up here when I go to showmemy.info. Yeah, I've already authorized, darn it. Once you've already cleared, it knows you're a human and it allows you through, so it kind of didn't work there. But I can also do password protection. Let me just lock the site down, and you've got to have a password to get in. And that way you could call your high-value clients real quick and say, all right, if you need to get to the site, here's the password right now, but everybody else is shut off. That kind of thing. Now that you've got somebody in between you and the internet, you can do that. You've got that gateway. That's the real value that a WAF creates. But they're also filtering all sorts of things, and you can even do really creative stuff. If you look at a lot of the attacks on your site, many of them are sourced from China, Korea, the Soviet Union. You've got some of the Eastern Bloc countries, the Ukraine, which we're friends with the Ukraine, right? They're in NATO, but a lot of the attacks come from there. So if you're a business that doesn't have customers in those countries, you can actually do geo-blocking. You can just come right in here and say, you know what? Let's find Iraq. Not Iraq, Iran. So there's U.S. embargoes on Iran. Maybe you're not allowed to do business with Iran. If you're not allowed to do business with them, then you don't necessarily need them even viewing your site. So you could come in here and find Iran. It's in the list somewhere, probably in the eyes. There we go. And you can block them off, right? And just shut them off. And that's easy enough to do. And now anytime they go and access it, they're going to get blocked. Now, I do want to highlight one important thing here. When I set this up, it's actually not perfect, right? The big problem here is the good guys. The good guys are going to come to the WAF, they're going to get cleared, and they're going to pass through, right? Hopefully, the bad guys are going to hit the WAF and get blocked. But what if they know the IP address of my server? Or what if they just find it by browsing around randomly? Maybe not using a DNS domain name, right? Maybe they're just browsing by IP and they stumble across it. A lot of the automated scanners can do that. Well, in that scenario, the bad guy could go straight to my server. And again, we saw where that regular firewall, it's just traffic on port 80. It's going to allow it through, right? So now the attackers could still directly access the server, which causes me a problem, okay? What we need to do is when you turn on a WAF, you need to reconfigure your firewall so that the internet at large is not allowed to access your server, that only the WAF is allowed to access your server. Now, if you own the WAF, if it's your device, that's easy. You know the IP address is associated with it and you approve it. But if you're using a third-party service, you've got to go to them and get the list of addresses that they use to turn around and access your site. Encapsula publishes a list, Security, Cloudflare, they all publish a list for that reason. In fact, when I was on the Security page, I probably glanced over it, but back under the Security tab, down here. All right, right here they talk about preventing firewall bypass, right? That's somebody skipping the WAF altogether and going straight to the server, and you want to prevent that. And they actually give instructions for Apache and for Nginx to do the security controls right there on the server. But remember what I said earlier, like protection on the server is really too late. You need to stop people before they get to the server. So what I normally do is come in and get these IPs and put them in my firewall and say, if you're in these ranges, and services like Security, they don't just have one IP, they have a bunch of IPs. And so if you look, these are all ranges. 192.88.134.0/23, 185.93.228.0/22. These are big networks, right? A /24 is 254 usable IPs. Well, here's a /23. So that's almost 500 IP. Oh, that's bad math. It's more than 500 IPs, right? You've got a /22. That's more than 1,000 IPs. These are the big blocks that these firewall providers use. But those are all blocks controlled by Security. So I know they're trustworthy. I can trust these. So in my firewall, I would say no one is allowed to access that web server except for these IPs. And so now if an attacker tries to do a bypass, if they try and go right to the firewall, they get blocked. The only way to get the website would be to go through the WAF first, and it filters that traffic, checks it out, and then allows it through or blocks it, right? That's kind of the whole purpose. Now, I've been talking about what WAFs do and how they work, but the actual setup, if you've been paying attention and taking notes, what was the actual setup? I just changed the DNS record. That's really it. They're super easy to get going. But I didn't build the WAF myself. Now, if you want to go that route, it is actually a lot of work. If you go back to that ModSecurity webpage, they have all the instructions that are on there to basically bring up a Linux box, install Nginx, install ModSecurity and Apache, load some custom rules, and then you've got the maintenance of it. You've got to keep it up and running and all of that. But there's also the redundancy aspect. If you just have a single box as your WAF, what happens if that single box fails? Your site's offline, right? So you need to have multiple ones. I mentioned like points of presence, POPs, all over the globe. You may need to have a bunch of these, and that's a lot of work. And if you're going to, like if you have the staff to do it and you can maintain it, then sure, do it yourself. But for most people, this is something that you're going to want to rely on some kind of a software as a service type solution. You know, reach out to these vendors because they have people that are monitoring the rules every single day. And when a new attack comes out, it's really neat because when a new attack comes out, let's say it's an attack on IIS. There was a good attack last week on IIS where if you were running Microsoft's Internet Information Server, the attack was designed where somebody could send traffic to it and it would spike the CPU to 100% and basically do a denial of service. And you could do it with just a handful of packets. Really easy to do. All right. Well, when Microsoft found out about it, what did they have to do? They have to figure out how to fix it. They've got to create a patch. They've got to push it out, right? They got to do all this different stuff. But the WAF vendors, all they have to do is say, all right, what instructions does the attacker have to send? And then block those instructions. It's that easy. They don't have to figure out how to fix the problem. They just stop it from being able to get to the server. That's why these things are so effective at what they do. All right. And they're easy to implement. If you can find one that you really like, there's a number of them out there. And actually, ModSecurity was developed by Trustwave, or Trustwave is the parent company, and then Spider Labs. It's some kind of weird. One of them is a nonprofit, one of them isn't. So it's all kind of weird. But they actually do have a commercial product that you can buy. Here, let me see if they have it linked in here. So you can sign up from the people who actually created this stuff if you want, or you can go with the third-party vendors. They all really, they all have a really good product, although some of them don't necessarily have their webpage in order. I got a 404 on the Trustwave site, but yeah, that's right. Maybe they're redirecting me, but anyhow, so maybe not them. but like I said, there are a number of vendors. The concept of a WAF is simple though, and so there's really, in this day and age, with the way the attacks are and the way things are going, it's really not an optional component anymore. If you're running web applications, if you have a website, if you have servers that are exposed to the internet, you want some kind of bastion in between you and the internet, and these application firewalls do a really good job of it. A lot of the cloud providers like Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services, AWS, they're offering WAF services now. And I'll tell you, I like Amazon. I use AWS a lot. Most of my company is run through AWS, but their WAF offering it's really sad. It has a maximum of 10 rules, which if you look at the other providers, they have thousands of rules. So it's way off. And the rules are very difficult to write, and they're just not very powerful. So that WAF is still evolving. A year from now, I might change my tune and say, oh, it's the best thing ever. They expanded all this functionality. But right now, it's just not very powerful. So take a look at the different providers, make sure they can do what you need, and then just pick one and stick with it. You'll find that they're all fairly effective. All right, well, that's a pretty good rundown, I think, on web application firewalls. So what I'd like to do is open the floor for questions and see what we can come up with. Ms. Cherokee is going to run the microphone around to everybody. So if you have a question, wait until she gets to you with the microphone. Otherwise, the remote viewers will not be able to hear it.
Hey, Don, great presentation. Thank you very, very much. I learned a lot tonight. Had a question. Why, you just mentioned at the end that the service providers like AWS and other people who host servers are just starting to offer WAF, whereas if you have a site that was developed years ago and the particular provider isn't offering that, why don't they tell you that you need that?
So there's a few reasons for that. It is a great question. Let's say that you're Amazon, right? And you've got hundreds of thousands of people that are hosting their websites on your equipment, right? You don't really know what their websites are or how their websites work. You don't know or even care if they're running WordPress or Drupal or Joomla or whatever. You don't know. The customers are paying to rent a virtual machine so that they can load whatever software they want on there. And so since Amazon doesn't know what software you're going to run, how can they protect it? And the short answer is they can't. In fact, if you sign up for their WAF service and you turn it on right now, the default configuration has 0 rules. The default configuration allows all traffic through. And I'll tell you, it's better than nothing because at least you have a WAF so you can shut off traffic if you need it. But there's no protection in the default WAF configuration. So that's the reason they don't offer it by default. It's not just like, hey, this is part of our package. Because in theory, they could be blocking traffic that you actually do want. Maybe you do want people all over the world to be able to log into the admin portal on your site. Even if you didn't want that, they don't know what IPs you do want and what IPs you don't want. So there's no way for them to know what's the right configuration for you. And so they don't offer it. Now, why don't they tell you that? Well, that's the same reason a car dealer doesn't tell you the car you're about to buy is a piece of junk. You know, they want you to buy it. So they generally don't tell you about the features that they don't have. They accent the ones that they do. But I think there's a number of the providers out there that are recognizing the importance of this. In fact, GoDaddy's offered cheap web hosting for years. I'm not the biggest fan of GoDaddy, but if you wanted cheap web hosting, they did it. They just acquired Security a few months ago. So they've recognized the value, and they're saying, look, let's protect our sites with Security wherever we can. And so that's what they're doing now. That acquisition closed, I think it was back in December that closed. So I think they're catching on, and we're going to see big changes there. But for right now, if you don't know if you have a WAF or not, it's best to assume that you don't, and then make decisions from there.
Follow-up question. We've been talking about websites. I assume that other types of servers, let's say an email server, does this WAF control that as well, or how is that done?
So yes and no. On an email server, if you've got web-based email, it obviously will snap right in and be able to protect the web-based side of that, right? But then you've got like your SMTP traffic and your IMAP and POP3, and a WAF isn't going to process that. That's not HTTP or HTTPS traffic. So in those scenarios, what you need is an application firewall or an application layer gateway, like I mentioned earlier, which is designed for email. And there's a number of organizations. I used to recommend IronPort, which got acquired by Cisco and is now, I think it's part of the no, it's not Firepower. It's got a different name, AMP. It's part of the AMP solution from Cisco. And it basically does the same exact thing, but for email. So any connection coming in or connections going out from your email server will pass through this additional box that looks at the commands that are being sent. Is it an IMAP connection? What's it being, what are the commands that are being sent? What's the activities it's performing? And make intelligent decisions. So it'll be a different solution. I mentioned how Security, they focus on WordPress, or Encapsula, where they just focus on web traffic. There'll be other ones that are out there for the different applications. Unless it's a custom, like if it's an in-house built application, then there's really not a great way to do this unless you build your own WAF solution as well, because you would know the types of traffic that should or shouldn't be going to that system.
So I guess the question is, when did this become more popularized? Because it sounds like a lot of the acquisitions and excitement are even in 2018, 17.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I started working with WAFs, I started with them a long time ago in the terminal services world, because there were special gateways for the terminal services side of things. That was probably 10 years ago. But in its current form, the web application firewalls that are really, really powerful, it really has been the last 4 or 5 years that they've been gaining popularity. And it's because more and more companies are not writing native applications anymore. They're saying, if I write a web application instead, every computer can run it. And mobile devices are what have pushed that, right? Because I don't want to have to write an app for Windows and Mac OS and Android and iOS and whatever other mobile phone thing comes along. But if I write a web app, it'll run on all of those, and that makes it easy. Well, because the applications were all moving to web pages, attacks became focused on web pages. And so now you have people like the OWASP top 10, right? So everybody familiar with the OWASP? Let me just find it real quick. The OWASP top 10. It's a list put together by, wait, this is not the actual list, darn it. This is what I get for Googling live during a presentation. But anyhow, so what the OWASP top 10 is, they put together a list of the top 10 attacks that are being perpetrated against web servers every year. And the list doesn't change much from year to year. So I've got the 2017 list, but I can pretty much guarantee you it's the same in 2019. There's things like SQL injections, XML, cross-site scripting attacks, insecure deserialization. These are attacks that are really common. Now, there's thousands of different types of SQL injection attacks, but they all follow the same kind of format, where a URL is used that includes certain strings in it that can be identified. And so these types of attacks have been ramping up, and somebody needed to be able to step in and fix that and block it. And that's where the WAFs have stepped in to do it. And about 4 or 5 years ago, basically attackers, it got to the point where they just couldn't generate enough bandwidth to do traditional style DDoS attacks. And so they started looking for things that were more sophisticated. And that's where this type of technology became really essential. And so now it's commonplace. And within a few years, this will become kind of a required part of any deployment.
Have they found any vulnerabilities in the WAF servers themselves?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The WAFs themselves are typically just Linux servers. Like a lot of times they're BSD servers. They're Unix style servers that are running ModSecurity and Nginx, right? Which are two huge open source products that they've had vulnerabilities, right? It happens. But the nice part is, if an attacker finds a vulnerability on one of those, they're compromising the WAF servers and not your servers. So that's kind of a nice thing. But let me tell you the risk that you take here. Most traffic these days is encrypted, right? We're supposed to use SSL for everything. In fact, in Google Chrome, if you go to a non-secure web page, it warns you. Actually, where's my Show Me My Info? Here. So I'm on my Show Me My Info page, and it's warning me it's not secure, right? So they're encouraging you to use SSL. Well, how is a WAF supposed to inspect the commands inside of a packet if it's encrypted, right? It can't. So when you set up SSL on your site, you have to go an extra step. And I didn't do it with mine, but in Security, let's see if I can find it real quick. Here, if I go to the HTTPS configuration, right? If I want to enable it, I either need to upload a custom certificate, which means give them a copy of my private key, or have them generate one just for that session. Now, in the past, you used to have to upload your private key, and that was a big risk. Because now, if an attacker got into the WAF, they could compromise your private key, and they can now decrypt any communication being sent to your website. That's bad, right? But it's not so bad now because they've started pushing Let's Encrypt, where the traffic is encrypted between the visitor and the WAF with one key, but then the WAF uses your normal key to go to the back end. They don't actually have to store that private key anymore. So there's a little bit of security there. So an attacker still would be able to intercept and decode traffic on the WAF. That would be the risk. Now, to some people, that's not an acceptable risk. But the reality is, for most companies, they don't have an incredibly active security team that's focused on this deployment. With a WAF, they do. And their deployment is very simple. All of their WAF servers are identical. So their server maintenance and monitoring and tweaking and tuning and all that is done at a very, very high level, or a very professional and high grade level that the rest of us aren't able to replicate, especially if you have 50 different web servers and they're all a little bit different. Each one can be vulnerable different ways. So we're basically, what do they call it? Not deferring a risk, where you push a risk off on somebody else. Thank you. We're transferring the risk over to someone else. And to a lot of companies, that's a weight off their shoulders. So pros and cons, like any decision, but that is an extra thing to think about.
Don, you said previously when you're purchasing this type of service, you're mainly purchasing the analysis that goes along with it to create the rules. Do you have any insight such as, is this human-based? Is it some kind of analysis engine or some kind of machine learning? Is it a mixture of all three?
It's actually kind of a mixture of all three. Cisco put out an article, I don't have it queued up here to bring up, but on their Talos Labs. Talos Labs is the security research team that Cisco has, and they do a combination of all three. So they watch for increases in traffic that matches certain patterns, and that stuff is automated, right? That's machine learning, AI, which is all just BS terminology for running a script. So they run scripts to find this stuff, and then push out the rules appropriately. Sometimes there's old attacks that aren't really relevant anymore, but then all of a sudden a new version of it comes out, and so they ramp those rules up. That's all automated. The Blickenbacher attack is one right now that was originally discovered almost 20 years ago, but now there's a new variant of it, and so those rules ramp back up. But then there's the human element as well, where they're examining some of the software that sits behind these firewalls to figure out what commands are valid and what commands are not, and so on. So it's a bit of a combination. Usually they can tell by the volume of traffic what's considered normal activity, and that way they just have to look at the abnormal activity to say, is this something we should block or not? So it's a mixture of systems that do that. And some are certainly better than others. With security, the way they're able to keep their price down is that they focus just on WordPress. They know the way WordPress is supposed to behave, so they can create a great rule set for it. But then you go to somebody like Cisco, they're not just worrying about WordPress. They're having to worry about everything: Drupal, Joomla, custom websites. And so for them, they have to have a lot more researchers that do a lot more work, and that drives up that price a good bit. So that's, you get what you pay for.
Don, do you remember all the questions again? I believe we're offline.
Oh, yeah? Sweet.
So we may have to ask you to answer that question.
All right, so for the viewers out there in TV land, I guess we dropped offline for a minute, but it is being recorded, so we'll be able to catch it in the reruns there. All right, what was the next question?
I'm just going to ask a follow-up question to the SSL that you mentioned.
Sure.
So normally, like in an e-commerce site, the client computer is negotiating an SSL connection to the secure other end, which is who they say they are. But in this case, they're actually setting up a point-to-point to the WAF, right?
Right, that's correct.
Who's been delegated to be who you say they are. Is this true?
That is correct, yes.
And then there's a separate, completely separate, so they can decrypt the traffic and look at it, and then they forward the traffic to you, to your website, and they set up a completely separate point-to-point SSL connection for that one.
Correct. Okay. Yep. Yeah, so where's my diagram? Let's see, this one. Here we go. All right, so the straight green line between the good guy and the WAF, right, that's one encrypted connection. And then it's decrypted at the WAF. They examine it, and then it's re-encrypted back to our web server. Now, I say it's re-encrypted. It doesn't have to be. You can actually cheat and have it unencrypted between the WAF and the web server, and now you're tricking your users. The users think they have a secure connection, and actually a leg of the journey isn't. That's a bad thing. You don't want to do that. Also, if you're worried about PCI compliance, that would be a total violation of PCI compliance, right? It needs to be encrypted all the way along, right? So the WAF vendor that you deal with, almost all of them are PCI compliant, so they're good as long as you keep your connections encrypted. Now, the neat thing, though, is the certificate between the internet user and the WAF, that needs to be a global trusted certificate. But the one on the back end, you can actually use internal or even self-signed certificates as long as you work with that provider to list them. Security actually doesn't allow that, but several of the other vendors do. So you can actually have really flexible certificates that expire super fast. And that's kind of the idea behind Let's Encrypt, is that the longest certificate you issue there is 3 months. On an internal link where you're self-issuing, you could have certificates that were only good for a day, and that improves your security even more. So you would have control over that, but it is two separate connections. That WAF is in the middle of every communication. It's kind of like a man-in-the-middle attack on purpose.
Yeah, Don, just had a question, about availability and uptime. It's a cloud-based service. Do they have SLAs for something like this? Nothing's a guarantee for just high availability and a certain amount of uptime.
Yeah, some of them do. Some of them don't. Like we use Encapsula at my office, and they actually do have SLAs. Now, I'll tell you, SLAs are one of those things that they sound good, but they don't actually mean anything, right? So if they had an outage, we have an SLA, and what does that mean? We get a credit on our bill. It's not like they magically make the server back online again, right? So they could go offline for a week. and then if they give me a year's service, that doesn't make me happy, right? So you do need to plan on redundancies, and many of the vendors give you that. They give you multiple servers to point to, or geo-dispersed types of deployments to cover for it. The more you pay, the more redundant it will be, right? But outages happen, just like anything else. But know that on their end, all of their servers are configured the same way, and they've got thousands, if not tens of thousands of customers. So when they have an outage, it's usually very well structured, the way they recover from that. And so outages are usually very small if they do have them, but everybody has an outage sooner or later, even the big players. Microsoft's had outages. Twitter's a joke. Like, they have tons of outages. I shouldn't say they're a joke, but they don't make money. So, all right. Well, either way. So lots of people have outages. You just have to plan for that.
Well, we've even seen in the past where DNS, like the East Coast, was down for quite a bit of time, and because this is a heavily reliant system on DNS, that could also be a potential weakness in that system. Absolutely,
yeah. And when you have providers that give you geo-dispersed results, like here, let me go back to that DNS Checker utility here. So if I pulled up let me pull up IT Pro TV. So my company is IT Pro TV, and if I pull up www.itpro.tv, we use a CNAME record. And if I search for that one, right, what you're going to notice, oh, shoot, I don't want the CNAME, I want the actual IP. Otherwise, it's just going to give me that. But what you'll notice as you look down the list is depending on the country you're in, you get a different IP. So here in the US, we're getting this 45.60.86.142. And then down here in the Russian Federation, we get a different IP. Or in, let's see, here we go. In Melbourne, Australia, it's a different IP. And so the nice part there is if we had an outage in the US, these other countries wouldn't necessarily be affected. And we could easily be rerouted to another country and our connection would be a little bit slower, but at least we'd hit a system that was online. So that's the type of thing you get when you start dealing with providers that have a bigger presence and a more reliable network.
Where does pfSense kind of fit in all this? I mean,
Sure.
My understanding is does it have WAF features?
Sort of. So pfSense, if you're not familiar with it, an open source firewall. It's a great product. I use it myself. In fact, I'm going through a pfSense box right now on this laptop. So it's good, but it is a firewall, right? So it's designed to act as a firewall. So kind of going back to the original design here, that's it. In pfSense 2.2, somebody wrote an add-on module that would add ModSecurity and basic WAF functionality. When they went to 2.3, or I might have it wrong, it might be 2.3 to 2.4, but either way, in one of the latest updates, that module didn't get updated. And so nobody's taken over that project to update it. So if you're running the current version of pfSense, I don't know a way to make it do that other than dropping down to the base OS, which is just FreeBSD, and then you can install everything and set it up that way. But they used to have a package you can install that would do it. I don't know if they'll have it again in the future. Maybe they will. There's a number of other software firewall people, like the Sophos firewall, I think it's called XG, the Untangle firewall, and a couple others. They all have WAF built into them. So some software firewalls do. pfSense, they focus, like that project is focused on maintaining high security and stability. And so they don't necessarily have the resources to do a lot of fringe things, and they've identified WAF as a fringe thing, at least for now. All right, any other questions? No? All right, well, thank you, everybody. Let me switch hats from presenter over to president for a moment. Again, I want to apologize to everybody for having to switch last minute on the speaker. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my talk. It was kind of thrown together. Normally I have nice little slides and stuff, but I took a chance on doing it with real websites, so hopefully that turned out okay. I do want to thank everybody for coming out here, especially those of you viewing remotely. I know that it takes time out of your personal life to come, but we always enjoy networking, communicating, meeting our peers. If you are remote, I encourage you to swing on by the chapter sometime. If you're in Gainesville, certainly pop on by. But even if you're out of town, swing in. We love to have visitors and see that. And it's it's a chance to meet everybody here. Get a chance to network, learn about what's going on in the community, and kind of hear the different projects that people are working on. It's a lot of fun. And we usually have a little bit of food and coffee, so definitely want to be here for that. In fact, our next chapter meeting is coming up on March 26th. So next month, time flies when you're having fun. Definitely come out and join us. But again, if you can't make it, no big deal. We'll stream it online. You can watch it live like you're doing right now, or we record it and post it onto the YouTube channel for our chapter as well. So you'll be able to take advantage of that. We are still working out our schedule for the speaker next month. Well, hopefully Joe was out today, but I'm hoping we can bring her back next month to give that presentation on ITIL. I know a number of people are really interested in it. So we'll shoot for that. But look for an email that'll go out in the next week or two that'll let you know who that speaker is and give you a chance to RSVP for it so we know how many people will show up. Also, if you are not a AITP chapter member, if you're just a visitor or a guest, again, you're welcome. We really enjoy having you here. But consider becoming an AITP member. If you go to AITP.org, you can learn more about the organization as a whole. It's a nonprofit that's designed to help people advance their careers and just better participate in the IT professional community. I've been a member for several years. Many of our members here have been with us for decades. It's a great organization. And then our website is AITP-NCFL.org if you want to learn specifically about the North Central Florida chapter. And I encourage you to go to that website because we have our event schedule posted there. Obviously, our monthly chapter meetings are where the real excitement is. But we also have board meetings that every member is welcome to attend. You don't have to be on the board to attend the board meeting if you ever want to come and hear us go through all of our paperwork and so on. But it's another chance to network and build up some camaraderie and maybe drink a beer or two. So definitely look for that. All right. I feel like there was something else I was supposed to mention. Anybody remember? What am I forgetting? No? Surveys? Oh, they're not ready yet. Okay. We are planning on sending out some surveys because we want feedback from people like you, which does remind me of what I wanted to say. Speakers. We are always on the lookout for good speakers here at the chapter. And, sometimes we have last-minute substitutions like myself, but we love to get different people's point of views and opinion and feedback. So if you know somebody that you think would be a good speaker, or if you yourself might be a good speaker, please let us know. We would love to have you come and speak to the chapter. Maybe you've got some great technology or solution, organization, or just a story you want to tell. Come on out, tell the story. We'd love to hear it. It doesn't matter if you're a professional speaker or if you've never spoken in public before. It's just it's actually a pretty small room. If you were here, you'd know. With usually 10, 12 people, something like that. It's a pretty casual environment. We just hang around and talk. You get to know everybody, and you can get up and tell your story. We would love to have you come and speak. Or again, if you know somebody. If you don't know anybody, but there's a topic you want to hear about, let us know that too. That'll be in the survey. Just tell us any topics you're interested in, and we'll reach out and try and find speakers in those areas because we want to make sure the chapter meetings are a benefit to everyone. And, well, we can do that if we know what you're looking for. All right. Well, I think that's going to be a wrap for us right here this meeting. Again, thanks everybody for viewing, those of you online and those of you right here in the room with me. Let's have a great month, and we'll see you back March 26th.